Hello, world. Good morning, sire. Good morning, Zazu. Checking in with the morning report. Fire away. Oh my, Harry and Meghan. If this is where the monarchy is headed, count me out. Oh God, man, they going through it. But anyway, how y'all doing? Another beautiful day. Sitting here on a Wednesday listening to some Fur Ellis. What? No, anyway, let me stop playing. What's up? What's up? Look, we talk about the Xbox Series X and airflow and why it is locking up the way it is. All right. Why do you think that most desktops comes with like five to six to seven fans? Airflow, right? Some of your power power supplies in your computer, you know that little box that supplies power, because the electricity that runs out your house, it's AC current, but then when it gets to the desktop, the power supply converter converts it to DC current, and then it supplies powers all over the place, right? So why do you think your desktop comes with so many fans? It's because of airflow. Your power supply has one, your CPU has one, your video card has one, and then your desktop case itself comes with like 5 to 6 different fans. So airflow is a problem. So if the CPU doesn't have the proper amount of airflow, it will overheat, freezes, locks up, and stop working. Okay, that's what happened with desktop. So, and another thing that stops a computer from working is dust. So the same rule that applies to desktop applies to console. So take the Xbox Series X. They're having an airflow problem. So because you got that high-end CPU that's inside the Xbox, plus you have the video card. But then you're having an airflow issue. So you have the vent at the top, and you don't have one at the bottom. So what needs to happen to the Xbox what needs to happen what needs to happen to the Xbox Series X is this: the same vent that's at the top of the Xbox Series X need to be at the bottom, so the fan can have a lot of air to pull across the CPU, so the CPU can stay cool. Another reason why the CPU why the CPU stopped working, because there's not enough the correct thermal paste that's on the CPU, and then you don't have the proper heat sink. So on the Xbox Series X, the same vent that's at the top, it needs to be at the bottom, so the fan can pull all that air across the CPU. Another option Microsoft has with the Xbox Series X, they need to put like 2 more fans within the Xbox Series X. So now you have 4 fans to deal with. So the video card can stay cool, the CPU can stay cool, and then you have the correct airflow running across all the components inside the Xbox Series X, so they can stay cool and the system can run correctly. So airflow is a big problem with the Xbox Series X. That's why it's overheating. It's not getting the proper airflow. So when it's not getting the correct air, the CPU starts to overheat, it locks up, and then it shuts the system off, and then it stops working, and then you got to reboot the system again. So the same rule that applies in desktop is the same thing that applies to the Xbox Series X. So airflow is a problem, and the way you fix that is take the same vent that's at the top and put it at the bottom. So now you got the vent going both ways. So now the CPU, the fan now can pull all that air to keep the CPU cool, and then keep that video card cool too. Okay, so because the video card that they're using, it's supposed to have its own fan on it too to keep it cool, and then the CPU with the heatsink supposed to have another fan. So all together, the Xbox Series X should have at least 4 fans, at least 4 fans running in it to keep everything cool. So so everything can run correctly. So yeah, that's the problem with the Xbox Series X. It's airflow, and that's why everything is locking up, it's freezing, it shuts off because it's not getting the correct airflow across the CPU, and then the CPU itself may not have the proper heat sink or the proper thermal paste that goes between the heat sink and the CPU, so they can stay together and stay cool. So that's what's happening with the Xbox Series X, man. And if you look at desktops, most desktops today comes with like 6 or 7 fans on it, because the power supply has one, the video card has one, the CPU has one, and then the desktop itself has like 4 to 5 of them. You know, all to produce air in the CPU to keep in the desktop in that little box to keep everything cool. So the same rule that applies to desktops is the same rule that applies to the Xbox Series X, because the CPU that the Xbox Series X is using is no joke. Same thing with the video card. So in order to keep things running correctly in that system, you need the proper airflow. And so what's going to happen is that the vent that's at the top, it needs to be at the bottom. So you got the vent at the top, the vent at the bottom, and that way that big fan can pull the air across the CPU. And probably they could add like 2 more fans inside that box, you know, so everything stays cool in there. And another thing that could stop the Xbox Series X from working, if dust builds up in it. So that's the main issue that's facing with the Xbox Series X right now. It's not like the red ring of death. No, it's airflow. You know, because you got the same vent, you got the vent at the top, but you didn't put one at the bottom. So when the fan decides to pull, now it's like, okay, where am I getting my air from? You forgot to put the same vent that was at the top at the bottom. So now the fan can pull all that air through those little holes across the CPU to keep it cool. So that's the issue that's facing with the Xbox Series X right now. So that's what Microsoft is going to have to fix with the Xbox Series X. You know, it's not a network issue. The problem is with the console itself. It's airflow, and airflow is the reason why most desktops stop working. Airflow and dust builds up. You're not getting the proper air across the CPU, and then the fan stop working. The CPU start to overheat. You freeze it, shut the system off, and then you got to clean. And then you wonder why people have that can of air to keep their system clean. You know what I'm saying? So you can run correctly. So the same rule that applies to desktops is the same rule that applies to the Xbox Series X. So airflow is a big problem with the system. So they're gonna have to jump on that quick. You know, they need to jump on that quick. So that's why I made a video about it this morning, but I didn't elaborate on it enough. So I made the second video just to really elaborate on it. So yeah, the same rule that applies, man, in desktops is the same rule that applies to the Xbox Series X. So airflow is a problem. So like I said, what they're gonna have to do, put the vent that they have at the top, they put it at the bottom, so the CPU can pull that air across it. They're gonna have to put a better thermal paste on the CPU where the heat sink sits on top of the CPU, and they're probably gonna have to put like 2 more fans up inside that inside the Xbox Series X to keep everything cool. Meaning the video card and the CPU, plus even the hard drive to keep everything cool. You know what I'm saying? So they can run correctly. So yeah, because like I told you, the more pin count a CPU has, the more it overheats. So airflow, meaning fans and all that, are needed to keep that CPU cool. So yeah, so that's what Microsoft is facing with the Xbox Series X right now, and that's a problem that they need to fix. Everything else is okay. It's just airflow, you know. Because if you stand the box like straight up, right, then your question is like, okay, where's the air coming from? If you stand the box straight up and you got a vent at the top, then the question is, okay, where's the air going to come from so the fan can operate? You know what I'm saying? And then if you cut the bottom part, if you stand it straight up and then you cut the air off, then you're having now you're affecting the CPU progress. So now the CPU start to overheat. Like, I need air to keep me cool here. So what they're gonna have to do again is take the vent that's at the top, put it at the bottom, probably put some shoes on the Xbox Series X on all four corners, so the fan has air to pull across the CPU. Depends on how you have it. If you like lay it flat or stand it up, but either or, you're gonna have to put some shoes on the Xbox Series X so you can stand it straight up, and then take the same vent that's at the front of the Xbox Series X and put it at the back. So now you got a vent at the front, vent at the back, and now that big fan can pull all that air across the CPU, and then keep the CPU cool and the video card cool. But and then they have the option of putting like 2 more fans inside the Xbox Series X and be done with it. So that's the problem that's facing the Xbox Series X. And then they could also put like a better thermal paste on the CPU with a better heat sink and be done with it. But airflow is a big problem. Is an issue when it comes to desktops and console, especially with the PlayStation 5 too. It's the same thing, airflow. So yeah, you gotta have a lot of fans, because consoles now are starting to become like desktops now, if you notice. So yeah, airflow is a problem. And so, because when you go up in CPU speed and video cards and all that, the heat increase. So now you gotta match that heat with a fan, some thermal paste, a heat sink, and airflow. Yeah, so that's what's happening with the Series X right now. So it's real easy to fix. So it shouldn't take them that long to fix it. But that's the problem that Microsoft is facing with the Xbox Series X. Airflow. Anyway, nice talking to you, beautiful people. Chris, still a Star Wars and Star Trek thing. Borg, dark side. I'm gone. Peace.